Catherine Williams sat in her small apartment kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from her dining table. The morning light filtered through thin curtains, casting long shadows across the worn wooden surface where she and her late husband David used to share their breakfast every day for 37 years. 6 months had passed since his sudden heart attack, but the silence still felt deafening. At 62, Catherine had never imagined she would be spending Christmas alone. Her only son Michael lived across the country in Seattle with his wife and 2 teenage children. They had invited her to visit, but the thought of being a burden during their busy holiday season made her decline. She told them she had plans with neighbors, a small lie that seemed kinder than admitting the truth. The apartment felt smaller each day. David's reading glasses still sat on the coffee table next to his favorite mystery novel, bookmarked at page 184. His coffee mug remained in the dish rack, washed but unused. Catherine couldn't bring herself to put these things away. They were the last physical reminders that her life had once been full of shared moments and quiet companionship. She picked up her phone and scrolled through social media, watching her friends post pictures of holiday preparations. Martha from down the hall had shared photos of her grandchildren decorating cookies. Her former co-worker Susan posted videos of her family's elaborate light display. Everyone seemed surrounded by love and laughter, making Catherine feel even more isolated in her grief. The idea came to her suddenly, while watching a young mother's video about teaching her toddler to say Merry Christmas. Catherine remembered how she and David used to make simple videos for Michael when he was little, recording his first steps and birthday parties on their old camcorder. Those tapes were now precious memories, especially the ones featuring David's voice and laughter. She realized that she had never made anything like that for herself. No record of her thoughts, her memories, or her feelings about the holidays that had meant so much to their family. David had always been the one behind the camera, encouraging her to wave or say something to their son. Now, with no one to document her life, Catherine felt invisible. That afternoon, she found herself at the local electronics store, feeling overwhelmed by the young salesperson's enthusiastic explanations about smartphone cameras and video editing apps. She had only recently learned to use basic features on her phone after David's death forced her to handle all their technology needs alone. "It's really simple, ma'am," the teenager assured her, demonstrating how to switch to video mode. "Just tap here and start talking. You can record as long as you want, and then share it however you like." Back home, Catherine sat on her couch with the phone in her hands, feeling foolish. What would she even say? Who would want to watch an elderly widow talking about Christmas? She set the phone aside and went to make dinner, another solitary meal eaten while watching the evening news. But, as she lay in bed that night, the idea wouldn't leave her alone. She thought about all the stories David used to tell about his childhood Christmases during the war, when his family had so little but still managed to create magic. She remembered her own mother's tradition of writing letters to each family member every Christmas Eve, expressing her love and hopes for the coming year. These traditions had died with the people who kept them alive. The next morning, Catherine woke with unusual determination. She spent an hour arranging her living room, moving David's chair to face hers so it would be visible in the frame. She placed their wedding photo on the side table and lit the small candle they used to burn during their evening talks. The setting felt right, intimate but purposeful. She pressed record and began to speak, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger as she found her rhythm. She talked about David, about their simple Christmas traditions, about the way he used to surprise her with thoughtful gifts that showed how well he knew her. She shared memories of Michael's childhood celebrations, the excitement in his voice when he called on Christmas morning, the way their small family had always made the holiday special through love rather than expensive presents. What surprised Catherine most was how good it felt to speak these memories aloud. She had kept them locked inside for months, afraid that talking about the past would make the present loneliness unbearable. Instead, sharing these stories made her feel connected to the people and moments that had shaped her life. She talked for nearly 20 minutes before realizing how long she had been recording. When she played it back, she was startled by her own voice. She sounded older than she expected, but there was warmth in her tone that she hadn't heard in months. More importantly, she had created something real and honest about her experience. Catherine wasn't sure what to do with the video at first. The thought of posting it online terrified her. She had barely mastered email and only used social media to keep up with distant relatives. But something about the recording felt important, like it deserved to be shared even if no one watched it. She spent the next few days editing the video with help from online tutorials, learning to trim the beginning and add simple text that introduced her story. The process was frustrating and time-consuming, but it gave her something to focus on besides her loneliness. She found herself looking forward to working on the project each morning, grateful to have a purpose that extended beyond her daily routine of grocery shopping and doctor appointments. On a quiet Wednesday evening, Catherine finally gathered the courage to upload the video to Facebook. She wrote a simple caption, sharing some Christmas memories and thoughts about spending the holidays alone. For anyone else who might be feeling lonely this season, you're not forgotten. She posted it without much expectation, assuming it might receive a few polite comments from family members and old friends. Then, she turned off her phone and went to bed, exhausted by the emotional effort of sharing something so personal with the world. The next morning, Catherine woke to a phone buzzing with notifications. When she unlocked it, she found dozens of comments, likes, and shares from people she didn't recognize. The video had somehow spread beyond her small circle of Facebook friends, touching strangers who resonated with her honest discussion of grief and loneliness during the holidays. Messages began pouring in from other widows and widowers who had watched the video and felt less alone in their own struggles. Adult children wrote to thank her for helping them understand what their aging parents might be experiencing. Young people shared their own stories of difficult holidays and found comfort in Catherine's gentle wisdom about finding meaning in sadness. One message particularly moved her. A woman named Sarah from 3 states away wrote that she had been planning to skip Christmas entirely after losing her mother earlier that year. Watching Catherine's video reminded her that honoring memories could be its own form of celebration, and she decided to host a small dinner for other friends who were spending the holiday alone. Catherine read each message carefully, amazed by the connections forming around her simple act of sharing. She had never considered herself particularly wise or inspiring, but something about her willingness to be vulnerable had given others permission to acknowledge their own difficult emotions during a season that often demands forced cheer. Local news stations began reaching out, asking if they could feature her story. Catherine initially declined, feeling overwhelmed by the attention. She had made the video for herself, as a way of processing her grief and preserving memories. The idea that it might become news felt surreal and slightly frightening. But, as more messages arrived, Catherine began to see that her story represented something larger than her personal experience. Loneliness among older adults was epidemic, especially during holidays when cultural expectations of family gatherings could make isolation feel even more painful. Her honest discussion of these challenges had opened a conversation that many people needed to have. She agreed to one local television interview, conducted in her living room with the same setup she had used for the original video. The reporter was kind and respectful, asking thoughtful questions about her decision to share such a personal story. Catherine found herself speaking more confidently than she had expected, drawing on the positive responses from viewers to articulate why representation of different holiday experiences mattered. During the interview, she emphasized that her goal wasn't to make people feel sorry for her, but to normalize the reality that not everyone's December looked like a holiday movie. She wanted other people in similar situations to know they weren't failures for struggling with loneliness, and she hoped families might be inspired to reach out to isolated loved ones or neighbors. The television segment aired during the evening news, generating even more response to Catherine's original video. Social media shares multiplied, and she began receiving mail at her apartment building from viewers who had somehow found her address. The letters were uniformly kind and grateful, sharing personal stories and thanking her for her courage in speaking openly about difficult topics. Catherine's phone rang constantly with interview requests from national news programs and magazines. She felt simultaneously grateful for the positive impact her story was having and overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Her quiet life had been completely disrupted, but in ways that felt meaningful rather than intrusive. She began planning a follow-up video, wanting to thank everyone who had responded to her story and to share some of the beautiful messages she had received. The experience of connecting with so many strangers had transformed her understanding of her own worth and the power of authentic communication. She no longer felt invisible or forgotten, and she wanted to help others realize that their stories mattered too. As December progressed, Catherine found herself busier than she had been in months. She was corresponding with new friends from around the country, participating in phone interviews, and working on a longer video that would include some of the wisdom she had gained from this unexpected experience. The loneliness that had felt so overwhelming just weeks before had been replaced by a sense of purpose and connection she had never imagined possible. Most surprisingly, the response to her video had inspired her own family to make new efforts to include her in their lives. Michael called more frequently, and his wife had started sending regular photos and updates about the grandchildren's activities. They had rescheduled their holiday plans to include a longer visit with Catherine, realizing through her video how much she valued these connections. Catherine's apartment felt different now. David's chair still sat across from hers, and his personal items remained in their familiar places, but the space no longer felt like a shrine to the past. Instead, it had become a place where memories and new experiences could coexist, where she could honor her husband's legacy while building something meaningful for herself. The transformation in Catherine's life had happened remarkably quickly, but it felt organic and right. She had taken a chance on sharing her authentic self with the world, and the world had responded with love, understanding, and connection. Her Christmas video had become much more than a personal reflection. It had started a national conversation about loneliness, community, and the importance of reaching out to others during difficult times. 3 weeks after Catherine's video first went viral, her small apartment had become an unexpected hub of activity. What started as a simple recording about loneliness during Christmas had evolved into something much larger than she could have ever imagined. The dining table where she once ate solitary meals was now covered with handwritten letters from across the country, each one sharing a personal story inspired by her courage to speak honestly about grief and isolation. The response had been overwhelming in the most beautiful way. Catherine spent her mornings reading letters from children who wanted to invite her to their family Christmas dinners, from other widows who felt less alone after watching her video, and from families who had been inspired to reach out to isolated elderly neighbors for the first time. Each letter brought tears to her eyes, not from sadness but from the profound realization that her small act of vulnerability had created ripples of kindness across the nation. Major news networks were now calling daily, requesting interviews about what they were calling the Catherine effect. The term had emerged on social media to describe the wave of community outreach and intergenerational connection that her video had inspired. Local news stations across the country were featuring stories of viewers who had been moved to action by Catherine's message, creating their own videos about holiday loneliness or organizing community gatherings for people spending Christmas alone. Catherine found herself at the center of a movement she had never intended to start. The attention was both gratifying and overwhelming. She had agreed to appear on a national morning show via video call, scheduled for the following week. The producer had explained that they wanted to discuss not just her personal story, but the broader social issues her video had highlighted about elderly isolation and the importance of community connection during the holidays. Preparing for the interview made Catherine nervous in a way she hadn't expected. Speaking to her phone camera in her living room had felt natural and private, even though she knew others would see it eventually. The idea of appearing on national television, with millions of viewers watching her every word and expression, felt enormous and intimidating. She worried about saying the wrong thing or somehow diminishing the positive impact her story was having. Her son Michael had called from Seattle to offer support and express his amazement at how his mother had become an unexpected public figure. During their conversation, he admitted that watching her video had made him realize how little he truly understood about her experience since his father's death. He had assumed she was managing well because she always sounded cheerful during their weekly phone calls, not realizing she was putting on a brave face to avoid worrying him. "I never asked the right questions," he told her during one of their longer conversations that week. "I asked if you were okay, but I never asked how you were really feeling or what your days looked like. I'm sorry I didn't see how lonely you were." Catherine reassured him that she hadn't expected him to read her mind, and that she had deliberately hidden her struggles to protect him from feeling guilty about living his own life. But their conversation sparked an important realization about how family members often avoid difficult topics to spare each other's feelings, inadvertently creating distance during times when connection is most needed. This insight became part of what Catherine wanted to share in her upcoming television appearance. She had learned that many families struggle with these same communication patterns, especially when dealing with loss, aging, and major life transitions. Her video had given people permission to have more honest conversations about difficult emotions, and she wanted to encourage viewers to keep those conversations going beyond the holiday season. The community response to Catherine's story had taken many forms. A local church in her neighborhood had reached out to organize a community Christmas dinner for anyone spending the holiday alone. When Catherine heard about the event, she volunteered to help with planning and food preparation, grateful for the chance to contribute to something positive that her story had inspired. Working on the dinner preparations introduced Catherine to other isolated community members she had never known existed, despite living in the same neighborhood for over a decade. There was Robert, a retired teacher whose adult children lived overseas, and Maria, a divorced mother whose teenage kids were spending Christmas with their father's family for the first time. These connections reminded Catherine that loneliness wasn't limited to elderly widows, it could affect anyone whose circumstances differed from the traditional family holiday narrative. The dinner planning meetings became a source of genuine friendship and purpose for Catherine. She discovered that she enjoyed organizing events and had a talent for making others feel welcome and included. These skills had been dormant during her marriage, when David had naturally taken the lead in social situations, but now they emerged as important aspects of her independent identity. Media attention continued to grow as Christmas approached. Catherine's original video had been shared millions of times across various platforms, and news outlets were featuring follow-up stories about the community initiatives it had inspired. A social media hashtag Catherine's Christmas, had emerged organically, with people sharing their own stories of holiday loneliness and the actions they were taking to help others feel less isolated. The hashtag connected Catherine to stories from around the world. A group of university students in Canada had organized care package deliveries for elderly residents in their community. A family in Texas had started a tradition of inviting their elderly neighbors to join their Christmas dinner every year. In the United Kingdom, a woman had created a phone tree system to ensure that no one in her village spent Christmas Day without someone to talk to. These stories amazed Catherine and helped her understand the global nature of the issues her video had addressed. Loneliness during the holidays wasn't just an American problem or something that only affected elderly people. It was a universal human experience that transcended age, nationality, and cultural background. Her willingness to share her personal story had given others around the world permission to acknowledge their own struggles and take action to help their communities. The morning of her national television interview, Catherine spent extra time choosing her outfit and arranging her living room to look welcoming but not overly staged. She wanted viewers to see her authentic self, the same woman who had recorded that first video in a moment of genuine vulnerability. She practiced answering potential questions about her experience, but she also wanted to ensure the conversation would focus on encouraging others rather than just rehashing her personal story. The interview itself felt surprisingly natural. The host was warm and genuinely interested in the social impact of Catherine's video rather than treating it as a feel-good human interest piece. They discussed the epidemic of loneliness among older adults, the importance of intergenerational connections, and the ways that small acts of outreach could transform entire communities. Catherine shared some of the most moving letters she had received, including one from a teenager who had been inspired to start visiting a nursing home after watching her video. She talked about the community Christmas dinner her neighborhood was organizing and encouraged viewers to look for similar opportunities in their own communities. Most importantly, she emphasized that the goal wasn't to eliminate all loneliness during the holidays, but to ensure that isolated people felt seen, valued, and remembered. During the interview, Catherine also addressed some of the criticism her video had received. A small number of viewers had suggested that she was seeking attention or pity, or that she should have simply reached out to family and friends rather than posting on social media. She acknowledged these concerns thoughtfully, explaining that she had tried traditional sources of support but still felt isolated, and that her decision to share publicly had been motivated by a desire to preserve memories rather than seek sympathy. "I think sometimes we're afraid to admit when we're struggling because we don't want to be seen as complaining or asking for help," Catherine said during the interview. "But there's a difference between wanting attention and wanting connection. I was sharing my story because it felt true and important, not because I expected anything in return. The television appearance generated even more response than Catherine had anticipated. The network's social media accounts were flooded with comments from viewers sharing their own experiences and commitments to reach out to isolated community members. Several other morning shows requested follow-up interviews, and publishers began calling about potential book deals to expand on the themes Catherine had discussed. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from her own community. Neighbors Catherine had barely spoken to for years began stopping by to introduce themselves and share their own stories. The elderly man from the apartment downstairs revealed that he had been struggling with loneliness since his wife moved to memory care. The young mother from upstairs admitted that she felt isolated as a single parent and had been touched by Catherine's honesty about difficult emotions. These conversations led to informal support networks within Catherine's building and neighborhood. People began checking on each other more regularly, sharing meals, and organizing simple social activities. The sense of community that developed felt organic and sustainable rather than forced or temporary. Catherine realized that her video had done more than address holiday loneliness. It had demonstrated the power of authentic communication to break down the barriers that often keep neighbors strangers. As Christmas week approached, Catherine reflected on the incredible transformation in her life over the past month. She had gone from feeling invisible and forgotten to being at the center of a national conversation about loneliness and community connection. More importantly, she had discovered aspects of herself that had been dormant for years: her ability to inspire others, her talent for bringing people together, and her capacity to find purpose and meaning even in the midst of grief. The community Christmas dinner had grown from an idea inspired by her video to a major neighborhood event with over 50 attendees. Catherine had taken on a leadership role in organizing the celebration, working with local businesses to donate food and decorations and coordinating with volunteers to ensure everyone felt welcome. The work gave her a sense of purpose and accomplishment she hadn't experienced since retiring from her job as a school secretary 5 years earlier. Catherine's relationship with her son Michael and his family had also evolved significantly. They had extended their Christmas visit and were arriving 2 days earlier than originally planned to attend the community dinner and spend more time together. Michael had confessed that watching his mother become a public figure had given him new respect for her strength and resilience. He was proud of her courage in sharing her story and amazed by the positive impact she was having on others. The experience had taught Catherine important lessons about the difference between being alone and being lonely. She realized that even when David was alive, there had been times when she felt isolated because she wasn't being fully authentic about her thoughts and feelings. The vulnerability required to create her video had actually made her feel more connected to others than she had in years, even before David's death. She began working on a follow-up video to thank everyone who had responded to her original post and to share some of the wisdom she had gained from the experience. This second video would be different in tone, focusing on gratitude and hope rather than sadness and isolation. She wanted to show viewers that sharing difficult emotions could lead to positive change and meaningful connections. Catherine's story was becoming bigger than just her personal experience of grief and loneliness. It was evolving into a testament to the power of authentic communication, the importance of community support, and the potential for unexpected sources of hope during difficult times. Her willingness to be vulnerable had created a space for others to do the same, fostering connections and conversations that might never have happened otherwise. The community Christmas dinner that Catherine had helped organize was just 3 days away, and her small apartment had transformed into an unofficial coordination center for what had become the largest neighborhood gathering anyone could remember. Volunteers stopped by throughout each day to drop off donations, pick up supplies, and coordinate their contributions to the celebration that had grown far beyond anything Catherine had originally envisioned. What started as a simple dinner for people spending Christmas alone had evolved into a multi-generational community festival. Local families had volunteered to attend and bring their children, creating an intergenerational celebration that would include activities for all ages. A local high school choir had offered to perform holiday music, and several neighborhood restaurants had donated food and serving supplies. The community center had provided their largest meeting room at no charge, moved by Catherine's story and the positive response it had generated. Catherine found herself in the unusual position of being both honored guest and chief organizer for an event inspired by her own experience of loneliness. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now busier and more socially connected than she had been in years, all because she had shared her feelings of isolation with the world. The attention felt surreal at times, but the practical work of organizing the dinner kept her grounded in the immediate needs of her community. Her second video, recorded as a follow-up to thank everyone who had responded to her original post, had garnered almost as much attention as the first. In it, Catherine had shared some of the beautiful letters and messages she had received, emphasizing the common themes of loneliness, connection, and the human need to feel seen and valued. She had also announced the community Christmas dinner, inviting anyone in her area who was interested to attend and encouraging viewers elsewhere to organize similar gatherings in their own neighborhoods. The response to the second video had been immediate and powerful. Catherine received messages from people across the country who were planning their own community Christmas celebrations, inspired by her example. A church in Ohio had organized a Christmas Eve dinner for anyone in their town spending the holiday alone. A group of friends in California had started a tradition of hosting an annual found family Christmas for people whose biological families were distant or difficult. In New York City, a community center had created a holiday meal delivery program for homebound elderly residents. These initiatives filled Catherine with a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. Her personal story of grief and loneliness had somehow catalyzed a movement of community connection that was spreading across the country. She regularly received updates from organizers of these various events, creating a network of people committed to ensuring that fewer individuals would spend the holidays feeling forgotten or alone. The media attention continued to grow as Christmas approached. Catherine had been featured in several national magazines and had participated in radio interviews from her living room. Publishers had reached out about book deals, and documentary filmmakers had expressed interest in following her story through the holiday season. While flattered by these opportunities, Catherine remained focused on the immediate goal of creating meaningful connections within her own community. Her relationship with fame felt complicated and sometimes overwhelming. Catherine appreciated that her story was helping others, but she struggled with being treated as a celebrity when she simply felt like an ordinary woman who had shared an honest moment of vulnerability. She worried about losing sight of the simple human needs that had motivated her original video amid all the attention and praise her story was receiving. Michael and his family had arrived for their extended Christmas visit, and seeing her grandchildren in person for the first time in over a year reminded Catherine of the family connections that remained central to her happiness. 16-year-old Emma and 14-year-old Josh were fascinated by their grandmother's unexpected internet fame and helped her manage the social media responses that continued pouring in daily. Emma, who was studying video production in high school, offered to help Catherine create more polished content for future posts. But Catherine gently declined, explaining that the raw, unfiltered quality of her original video had been essential to its impact. She didn't want to lose the authenticity that had made her story resonate with so many people by trying to create something more professional or perfect. Josh surprised Catherine by admitting that her video had inspired him to reach out to an elderly neighbor in Seattle who lived alone. He had started stopping by Mrs. Chen's apartment after school to help with small tasks and just to talk. Their friendship had become one of the highlights of his week, and he credited his grandmother with teaching him that age differences didn't have to be barriers to meaningful relationships. These conversations with her grandchildren revealed how Catherine's story had affected her own family in ways she hadn't expected. Michael confessed that he and his wife had begun discussing ways to better support elderly community members in their own neighborhood, inspired by watching his mother become an advocate for addressing loneliness among older adults. The experience had made them more aware of the isolated individuals in their own community and motivated them to take action. The day before the community Christmas dinner, Catherine received a phone call that surprised her more than any of the previous media attention. The caller identified herself as a representative from a major television network who wanted to feature Catherine's story in a primetime holiday special about people making a difference in their communities during Christmas. The program would film the community dinner and include interviews with Catherine and some of the people whose lives had been touched by her video. Catherine's initial instinct was to decline. The community dinner felt sacred to her, a genuine expression of human connection rather than a media event. She worried that television cameras might change the atmosphere and make attendees feel like they were performing rather than simply enjoying each other's company. But, after discussing it with Michael and some of the other dinner organizers, she agreed to allow limited filming with the understanding that the focus would be on the community rather than on her as an individual. The decision to allow filming reflected Catherine's growing understanding of her role in the larger story that was unfolding. While she remained uncomfortable with personal attention, she recognized that documenting the positive outcomes of community connection might inspire viewers to create similar initiatives in their own areas. Her story was no longer just about her experience, it had become an example of how individual vulnerability could catalyze collective action. On the morning of the community Christmas dinner, Catherine woke up feeling a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and profound gratitude. 6 months after David's death had left her feeling invisible and forgotten, she was about to host a celebration attended by over 60 community members of all ages, with television cameras documenting the event for a national audience. The transformation felt miraculous and slightly overwhelming. She spent the morning at the community center helping volunteers set up tables, arrange flowers donated by a local florist, and organize the potluck dishes that neighbors had been dropping off since early morning. The variety and quantity of food reflected the diverse community that was gathering: traditional American holiday dishes alongside Korean kimchi, Mexican tamales, Italian pasta salads, and Ethiopian injera bread. The multicultural feast represented the kind of inclusive celebration Catherine had hoped to create. As guests began arriving, Catherine was struck by the mix of people who had come together because of her story. There were elderly community members who rarely left their apartments, young families with small children, college students far from home, and middle-aged individuals navigating divorce or job loss. The common thread wasn't age or circumstances, but rather the basic human need for connection and belonging during a season that could intensify feelings of isolation. Robert, the retired teacher she had met during the planning meetings, arrived with a photo album full of pictures from his 40-year teaching career. He set up a corner where people could look through the albums and share their own stories about favorite teachers or school memories. His contribution created an intergenerational conversation starter that helped break down barriers between guests who might not have found common ground otherwise. Maria, the divorced mother, had brought her teenage daughter Sophia, who surprised everyone by organizing impromptu holiday crafts for the younger children in attendance. Sophia later told Catherine that participating in the dinner had taught her about the importance of community service and had inspired her to volunteer regularly at local nonprofit organizations. The dinner was creating positive impacts that extended beyond just addressing holiday loneliness. The television crew arrived discreetly and set up their equipment in unobtrusive locations around the room. The producer had kept her promise to focus on the community rather than treating Catherine as the star of the show. The cameras captured candid conversations between guests, the collaborative spirit of the potluck meal preparation, and the natural interactions between people of different ages and backgrounds who were getting to know each other for the first time. During the dinner, Catherine was approached by a young woman named Jessica who had driven 2 hours to attend the celebration after watching Catherine's video online. Jessica explained that she was a graduate student studying social work and was writing her thesis about community interventions for elderly isolation. Catherine's video and the dinner it had inspired were perfect examples of grassroots solutions to social problems that government programs often failed to address effectively. Their conversation led to discussions about the broader implications of Catherine's story for social policy and community development. Jessica pointed out that Catherine had essentially created an informal social service program through her willingness to share personal vulnerability, demonstrating how individual action could address systemic problems when formal institutions fell short. This perspective helped Catherine understand her story in a new context. She began to see that her experience represented more than just one widow's journey through grief. It illustrated the potential for ordinary citizens to identify and address community needs through personal initiative and authentic communication. Her video had succeeded not because it was professionally produced or strategically planned, but because it honestly reflected a common human experience that formal support systems often overlooked. As the evening progressed, spontaneous moments of connection occurred throughout the room. An elderly man who had been widowed for 3 years found himself deep in conversation with a young father about the challenges of single parenting. A college student homesick for her family in India bonded with a retired librarian over their shared love of poetry. Children played games organized by teenagers while their parents exchanged contact information and made plans for future gatherings. Catherine moved through the celebration feeling overwhelmed by gratitude for the unexpected turns her life had taken. 6 months earlier, she had been eating solitary dinners and struggling to find meaning in her days. Now she was surrounded by a community that existed because she had found the courage to share her authentic experience with the world. The transformation felt both miraculous and logical, the natural result of replacing isolation with genuine human connection. The television crew captured interviews with several guests who shared how Catherine's video had affected their own approaches to community involvement and family relationships. A middle-aged man explained that watching her story had motivated him to call his elderly father more frequently and ask more meaningful questions about his daily life. A young mother described how Catherine's honesty about loneliness had helped her reach out to other isolated parents in her neighborhood. These testimonials reinforced Catherine's growing understanding that her story had resonated because it addressed universal human needs rather than just the specific challenges facing elderly widows. People of all ages and circumstances struggled with feelings of isolation and the difficulty of maintaining authentic connections in busy, fragmented communities. Her willingness to be vulnerable had given others permission to acknowledge their own struggles and take action to address them. As the formal dinner portion of the evening concluded, guests naturally organized themselves into smaller groups for continued conversation. Some gathered around Robert's photo albums, others helped with cleanup while chatting about their own holiday traditions, and a group of teenagers taught traditional holiday songs to the younger children. The organic flow of activities reflected the genuine community spirit that Catherine had hoped to create. The television producer approached Catherine near the end of the evening to express amazement at the authentic connections that had developed during the celebration. She explained that most media events felt forced or artificial, but the community Christmas dinner had captured something real and meaningful about human relationships and community building. The footage would provide powerful evidence that small acts of courage could create significant positive change. Christmas morning arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation for Catherine. For the first time in 6 months, she woke up not to silence and solitude, but to the gentle sounds of her son's family moving around in the guest bedroom and kitchen. Michael had insisted on making breakfast for everyone, a role reversal that touched Catherine deeply as she watched her grown son care for his family in the same thoughtful way David had once cared for theirs. The community Christmas dinner 2 days earlier had exceeded everyone's expectations and left Catherine feeling profoundly changed by the experience. The television special featuring her story was scheduled to air that evening on Christmas Day, and she found herself both nervous and excited about sharing this celebration with a national audience. More importantly, the dinner had created lasting connections within her neighborhood that would continue long after the holiday season ended. Emma and Josh were sprawled on the living room floor, helping Catherine organize the hundreds of Christmas cards and letters that had arrived from viewers around the country. Many included photos of community gatherings inspired by Catherine's video, thank you notes from people who had reached out to isolated neighbors, and updates from families who had changed their holiday traditions to be more inclusive of elderly or lonely community members. One letter particularly moved Catherine. It came from a retirement community in Florida where residents had watched her video together and decided to create their own support network for members dealing with grief and isolation. They had established regular coffee meetings, paired newer residents with longtime community members as friendship partners, and organized group activities specifically designed to help people share their stories and connect over common experiences. The letter included photos of their Catherine Circle, a weekly gathering where residents practiced the kind of authentic sharing that had made her video so powerful. They reported that loneliness and depression among community members had decreased significantly since starting the program, and they credited Catherine's courage in sharing her story with giving them permission to address these issues openly rather than pretending everything was always fine. Reading about these positive outcomes reinforced Catherine's growing understanding that her video had succeeded because it had addressed fundamental human needs rather than just her personal circumstances. People everywhere struggled with the challenge of maintaining authentic connections in a culture that often prioritized surface-level interactions over genuine emotional intimacy. Her willingness to be vulnerable had demonstrated that sharing difficult truths could create deeper relationships and stronger communities. Michael found Catherine reading letters in the kitchen and joined her at the table with his coffee. Their relationship had evolved significantly since her video went viral, moving from polite weekly check-ins to more frequent and meaningful conversations about their experiences, feelings, and hopes for the future. Michael had admitted that watching his mother become a public figure had given him new respect for her strength and wisdom. "I keep thinking about something you said in that television interview," Michael told her as they sat together. "About the difference between being alone and being lonely. I realize now that even when Dad was alive, there were probably times when you felt lonely because you weren't sharing everything you were thinking and feeling." Catherine nodded, appreciating her son's growing insight into her experience. "I think we all do that sometimes," she replied. "We try to protect the people we love by not burdening them with our worries or sadness. But it can also create distance when what we really need is connection." Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call from the television network. The producer wanted to let Catherine know that early viewer response to the holiday special had been overwhelming, with social media posts about the program already spreading across multiple platforms. More importantly, the network had received calls from viewers who were organizing their own community Christmas celebrations inspired by what they had seen. The producer also shared that several major charitable organizations had reached out about partnering with Catherine to address elderly isolation on a larger scale. These groups recognized that her grassroots approach to community building could be adapted to serve populations beyond her own neighborhood. While Catherine felt honored by these opportunities, she remained committed to focusing on local relationships rather than trying to manage a national program. After the phone call, Catherine reflected on the unexpected trajectory her life had taken since recording that first video. She had never intended to become an advocate or public figure. She had simply wanted to preserve some memories and share her honest experience of the holiday season. The fact that her small act of vulnerability had inspired such widespread positive change felt both miraculous and slightly overwhelming. Emma approached with her laptop, excited to show Catherine the social media response to the television special that had aired in earlier time zones. The hashtag Catherine's Christmas was trending nationally, with thousands of people sharing photos and stories from their own community celebrations. The posts showed families including elderly neighbors in their holiday meals, community centers hosting dinners for people spending Christmas alone, and intergenerational groups creating new traditions that honored both celebration and remembrance. One post that caught Catherine's attention came from a young military wife whose husband was deployed overseas. She had watched Catherine's video and realized that many other military families in her area were probably spending Christmas alone. She organized a potluck dinner for military families, and the photos showed children playing together while their mothers shared stories and support. The woman credited Catherine with helping her understand that reaching out to others could address her own loneliness while also helping people in similar situations. These stories reinforced Catherine's belief that authentic connection required reciprocity rather than just one-way support. The most successful community initiatives inspired by her video seemed to be those where participants both gave and received emotional support, creating sustainable relationships based on mutual care rather than charity. Her own experience at the neighborhood dinner had felt meaningful precisely because she had been both organizer and attendee, helper and helped. As Christmas Day progressed, Catherine found herself thinking often about David and how he would have reacted to her unexpected fame and the positive impact her story was having. She believed he would have been proud of her courage in sharing their memories and touched by the way her honesty had helped others feel less alone. More than that, she thought he would have been amazed by the confident, purposeful woman she had become in the months since his death. The experience of creating and sharing her video had revealed aspects of Catherine's personality that had been dormant during her marriage. David had naturally taken the lead in social situations and public interactions, while Catherine had been content to support him from the background. Now, in her grief and solitude, she had discovered her own voice and her own capacity for leadership and inspiration. This realization didn't diminish her love for David or her sadness about his death, but it did help her understand that her life could have meaning and purpose even without him. The community connections she had built, the conversations her story had started, and the positive changes it had inspired were all extensions of her own values and capabilities. She was grieving the loss of her partner while simultaneously discovering new aspects of her own identity. The television special aired that evening, and Catherine watched it surrounded by her family in the living room where she had recorded her original video. Seeing the community Christmas dinner featured on national television felt surreal, but the program had captured the genuine spirit of connection and community that had made the event so meaningful. The producers had focused on the stories of individual attendees rather than treating Catherine as the star, which felt appropriate and respectful. During the broadcast, Catherine's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, neighbors, and strangers who were watching the program. The immediate response was overwhelmingly positive, with viewers expressing gratitude for the inspiration to create similar communities in their own areas. Several people mentioned that they had already reached out to isolated neighbors or family members after watching the special. One message particularly touched Catherine. It came from Sarah, the woman who had written months earlier about planning to skip Christmas after losing her mother. Sarah sent a photo from her own holiday dinner, which showed a table full of friends who had all been spending Christmas alone before deciding to gather together. She thanked Catherine for helping her realize that honoring memories could coexist with creating new traditions and connections. As the evening wound down and her family prepared for bed, Catherine sat quietly in her living room reflecting on the incredible journey that had begun with a moment of loneliness and vulnerability. The empty chair across from her where David used to sit no longer felt like a symbol of absence and loss. Instead, it had become a reminder of the love they had shared and the values that continued to guide her decisions and relationships. The next morning brought news that the television special had been one of the most watched holiday programs of the year, and that social media activity around #Catherine's Christmas had reached millions of people. More importantly for Catherine, she received calls from several neighbors wanting to continue the community connections that had been established at the dinner. Plans were already underway for a New Year's gathering and regular monthly potlucks that would keep the spirit of connection alive throughout the year. Catherine realized that her video had succeeded in ways she had never imagined possible. What began as a personal reflection on grief and loneliness had evolved into a movement promoting authentic communication, intergenerational relationships, and community support for isolated individuals. Her story had given people permission to acknowledge difficult emotions while also inspiring them to take action to help others facing similar challenges. The experience had also transformed Catherine's understanding of her own worth and potential. At 62, after 37 years of marriage and 6 months of widowhood, she had discovered that she had important things to say and the ability to inspire positive change in others. This recognition didn't erase her grief or completely eliminate her loneliness, but it provided a foundation for building a meaningful life moving forward. In the weeks following Christmas, Catherine continued to receive letters and messages from people whose lives had been touched by her story. Many shared updates about the community initiatives they had started, the relationships they had built with isolated neighbors, or the difficult conversations they had finally had with family members about loneliness and support. Each message reinforced her belief that authentic vulnerability could create powerful positive change when shared with courage and intention. Catherine began working on a book about her experience, not because she wanted to capitalize on her fame, but because she believed the lessons she had learned about grief, community, and authentic communication could help others navigate their own challenges. The book would focus less on her personal story and more on the practical strategies for building connections and support networks that her experience had revealed. She also accepted a few speaking engagements at community centers and senior organizations, sharing her insights about overcoming isolation and the importance of intergenerational relationships. These presentations felt natural and purposeful, allowing her to connect directly with people who might be struggling with similar challenges while avoiding the overwhelming nature of national media attention. Most importantly, Catherine had built lasting relationships within her own community that provided ongoing support and friendship. The monthly potluck dinners continued to grow, bringing together neighbors who had been strangers before her video created opportunities for connection. She had also developed close friendships with several of the dinner organizers, creating a support network that extended far beyond her family relationships. Looking back on the year that had begun with such profound loss and loneliness, Catherine felt amazed by the unexpected directions her life had taken. David's death had initially left her feeling invisible and forgotten, but sharing her authentic experience of grief had ultimately made her feel more seen and valued than ever before. Her willingness to be vulnerable had created connections and opportunities she never could have imagined, while honoring the love and memories that remain central to her identity. Catherine's Christmas video had become much more than a personal reflection on holiday loneliness. It had sparked a national conversation about the importance of community connection, the power of authentic communication, and the potential for individual stories to create collective change. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that even in moments of profound sadness and isolation, people could find ways to reach out, connect with others, and create meaning that extended far beyond their personal circumstances. The legacy of Catherine's video would continue long after the holiday season ended, inspiring ongoing conversations about how communities could better support isolated members and how individual courage in sharing difficult truths could catalyze positive change. Her story had proven that ordinary people could create extraordinary impact through simple acts of authentic communication and genuine care for others.